right. Good morning, everyone. I'm using a microphone so that those are joining us live can hear. And there's a 15-second one. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us in our first behavioral track of the day. The session will be an overview of indigenized motivational interviewing. Our presenter this morning is Dr. Lonnie Nelson. Dr. Lonnie Nelson is a descendant of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. He earned his PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Arizona and completed a postdoctoral fellowship in rehabilitation psychology at the University of Washington's Harborview Medical Center. In 2012, he returned to the field of Native health disparities through the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Career Development Award at the University of Washington School of Public Health. Dr. Nelson joined the Washington State University College of Nursing in 2015. His work aims to address health disparities experienced by American Indian and Native communities through multiple avenues. His current research interests focus on the elimination of health disparities in urban dwellings and other Native populations through the application of culturally adapted, evidence-based interventions and other patient-centered approaches to changing health behaviors, such as indigenized motivational interviewing and harm reduction treatments. Outside of work, he enjoys making and using traditional Native archery gear and spending time with his 3-year-old daughter, Amelia. Welcome, Dr. Nelson.
Well, that's a little out of date. She's 6 now. I think that she's going to be advancing the slides for me. So she covered pretty much everything on the slide that she's going to go to when she gets back there. All right. Oshio. Dodo, Lonnie Nelson. And like she said, I'm a descendant of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and went to University of Arizona for pretty much all of my schooling. I started off actually at Pima Community College in Tucson. After I got my associates, I transferred to the U of A and went all the way through bachelor's, master's, and PhD there in Tucson. Currently work for an organization called Partnerships for Native Health. And it's primarily a research unit, though we do have education and outreach arms as well. But we're, as a unit, pretty much entirely focused on addressing American Indian and Alaska Native health disparities. I think she mentioned I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and that's how I came to be in front of you teaching indigenized motivational interviewing. Back in 2016, our tribal liaison, Abigail Echohawk, was at the Rocky Mountain Tribal Leaders Council, just visiting and doing some outreach work. And they said, we've got this grant and we need to hire somebody to put on a motivational interviewing training for our Native serving agencies. Do you know anybody that can do it? And Abigail said, yeah, I can get Lonnie to do it. And that's how this whole thing started. So I developed a 2-day intensive workshop that covers an indigenized perspective on motivational interviewing for Native serving organizations. When I'm not doing this, which I don't do all that often, maybe 4 times a year, I'm a researcher. And I work on everything from suicide prevention to enhancing retention in medication-assisted treatment programs for opioid use disorder to, risk and protective factors for Alzheimer's disease among urban dwelling Native elders, sleep health, and its relationship to the risk for developing chronic disease in Native populations. So I've got my fingers in a lot of different pies. These folks here are the reason that I do the work that I do. It's my grandma, my dad, and my daughter. I don't want her to have to experience the same health disparities that my generation and their generations experienced. And so that's why I do what I do. Okay. So overview of today's session. This is actually the first hour of the 2-day intensive that I give. I only actually talk at the class for about an hour at the beginning, and then it's all exercises after that. So this is the intro that they get when they do that training. So first off, just describing what MI is, and the spirit of MI and MI prayer why motivational interviewing is appropriate for Native populations, the theory of change in motivational interviewing, or how it is that we think that people change their health behaviors from the perspective of motivational interviewing. And then we'll do an introduction to the main tools and a little bit of exercises in recognizing change talk and recognizing strengths, which is an important aspect to the indigenized version. So MI is a way of being with clients and relatives that facilitates the exploration of their experience and thoughts around behavior changes of different kinds with the intention of helping them to make the best decisions for their life and health. That's the textbook definition. Okay. What it is not, it's not analytic. You're not going to be asking people about their relationship with their mother, unless, of course, she's part of the dynamic that's going on at present. It's not shaming. Don't try to make people feel bad for where they are on their path. It's not punishing. There are no punishment or reward schedules that are going to be used. It's not behavior therapy. It's not prescriptive. We don't presume to know what's best for the client or relative. That's their path. And it's not coercive. We're not going to say, if you don't do this, then, bad things are going to happen. None of these things occur if you're doing motivational interviewing. So in the definition, it said it's a way of being, and it is. It's a way of being in collaboration between yourself and the relative across from you. Your job is going to be to evoke or draw out the client's ideas about change and emphasize their autonomy in the process, while holding a spirit of compassion as you go through it. Next. So Bill Miller worked with a Dene fella named Ray Daw in the development of motivational interviewing. And Ray told him that if it was going to be a native practice, it had to have a prayer, a song, and a dance associated with it. And Bill, I don't know if anybody's ever seen Bill Miller on videos or in pictures or anything, but he's kind of a lanky, old white dude who doesn't appear to have a lot of a sense of rhythm. He seems a little bit clumsy. So he said that he could probably take on writing the prayer, but that he was going to leave the writing of the song and the dance to somebody who was more artistically inclined. So this is the MI prayer, and I think that it captures the spirit of motivational interviewing really, really well. And so I like to read it out loud, even though I know that all of you can read. I really like this. Insert your tribal name for creator at the beginning, would you like? Uneklanaki. Guide me to be a patient companion, to listen with a heart as open as the sky. Grant me vision to see through her eyes and eager ears to hear her story. Create a safe and open mesa on which we may walk together. Make me a clear pool in which she may reflect. Guide me to find in her your beauty and wisdom, knowing your desire for her to be in harmony, healthy, loving, and strong. Let me honor and respect her choosing of her own path and bless her to walk it freely. May I know once again that although she and I are different, yet there is a peaceful place where we are one. And that's actually in the 3rd edition of the motivational interviewing book. So why motivational interviewing for Native populations? I gave you an intro about some of the work that I do, and I do it all over Indian country. I work with a lot of different tribes, and there are some commonalities. We all have our individual cultural traditions and heritage, but there are common values that run through Native cultures. The respect for self-determination and the attitude of respect that everyone deserves are two of these. Recognition of the connection that we share with everything around us, not just other humans, not just other non-humans, not just the plants and the water and the land, but everything. A sense of responsibility because of that recognition of the connection that we share. A fundamental value of humility and being humble. The ability to feel with the others that we're connected to and to feel what they're experiencing. Respect for that anyways. A pride in who we are and that we survived this far, given the colonization practice. And then the value of integrity. Now, when I say integrity, some people think of, 2 slides. And the next one. Most people think of this definition, the quality of being honest and having a strong moral principles. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this one, the state of being whole and undivided. The state of not having any part of yourself in conflict with another part of yourself. That's what I mean when I talk about the value of integrity in Native cultures. People, especially in Native communities, really value that sense of being united and not being in conflict with oneself. Okay. So I want you to think of motivational interviewing as the process of guiding the relative across from you toward integrity, toward a place where their behaviors are not in conflict with their values, their thoughts are congruent with their spirit, and they're able to live their life as a unified whole, as opposed to fragmented parts working against each other. So in this conversational style, you'll open by connecting with cultural practices as appropriate. Some people like to smudge at the beginning of a session just to set the environment right and to bring everybody to a calmer place or a more peaceful place. You want to think of what you're doing as guiding, sort of like if you were on a hike through a forest with a person. You would, along the way, point out possible pathways that they could turn down, and maybe a little bit of medicine over there, tell them about what it is, ask them what they know about it, so on and so forth. In this conversational style, you are not telling people what to do at all. You're not judging where people are at all. You're understanding with and working with their ambivalence, recognizing that they are the experts on their experience and that you're just a visitor. Next. So what's different about an indigenized approach to motivational interviewing? Up to this point, I've just basically showed you what the textbook has in it. In an indigenized approach, there's this emphasis on integrity. And above all, we're trying to help people make decisions that make them feel and be whole. And that's not really a focus in textbook motivational interviewing. In the workshop that this is an intro to, we use a spiral learning model because in Native cultures, we don't think of learning as a linear process. You cover the same material over and over again, but you get a deeper understanding every time you go over it. And that's built into the exercises and such that the rest of the workshop is based on. Connecting with spiritual and cultural practices as appropriate, and tying these to people's action plans. It can be a much more powerful thing if a person who's deciding to make a behavior change wakes up in the morning, gets out of bed, smudges and prays to Creator to help them to accomplish the behavior change that they have committed to, and then moves forward from that grounded, centered space. It makes it more meaningful for them. And then guiding participants as a companion, not an advisor, and not presuming to know what's best for them. Again, not telling people what to do. I can't emphasize this enough. That is psychopathic behavior in many Native cultures, unless you are their grandma, in which case you can tell them what to do. That's perfectly fine. But given that you're not their grandma, you don't. Not judging where people are on their path, we have to accept our relatives as they come to us. If they were already healthy and whole and happy, they would not need us, right? So we need to accept where they are when they walk in, no matter what that state is. And congratulate them that they got there, right? Understanding the pull of two worlds. The dysfunctional behaviors that we see in our relatives are often the result of abuse, neglect, addictions in the previous generation, and the other secondhand smoke of the fires of colonization. It is not their fault that they are in the rough patch that they are in. And it wasn't their parents' fault that they were in that spot. We are a population of people who have survived a very, very violent conquer and colonization. And we have to recognize that that's what our relatives are working with. That's where they're working from. Recognizing that people know their own path. You're a visitor with limited knowledge of that path, and it's a privilege to be let in if they do let you in. And you have to respect that privilege. So what do we know about behavior and behavior change? How does a person go from being a smoker to being a non-smoker? Thoughts? Mm-hmm. So maybe seeing an example of what can happen if you continue to smoke. Okay, cool. Other ideas? How about in the process of working with somebody? Mhm.
Sometimes like she was mentioning might happen, and you might see something in another person, and you start thinking about, oh, well, this usually happens to me, maybe this isn't so great for my health.
Mhm.
Think about things
Mhm. Yeah, those are the stages of change. Very good. Yeah. But in the beginning there, you said, we might start thinking about, oh, this maybe isn't so good for my health, and maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And if you're working with somebody as a counselor and they start talking about those kinds of things, you want to encourage that. Next slide. Because that is change talk. That's the kinds of statement that people will make when they're considering making a behavior change. So when you're the counselor working with that person, you want to encourage change talk as much as you can and sort of work with sustain talk that promotes the status quo in such a way that you recognize or help them to recognize that it's not as helpful as maybe it had been in the past. But this is the basic theory of change in motivational interviewing, is that people will make statements toward change when they are more likely to change their behavior. And they will make statements justifying the status quo when they are less likely to change their behavior. Next. Last thing in the world that you want to find yourself doing if you're doing motivational interviewing is arguing for change while the person across from you is arguing for the status quo. You do not engage in power struggles. If you find yourself in a power struggle, go back to the beginning and start developing rapport and make sure that you understand what the priorities of the relative across from you are. Because if you're in a power struggle, you're not on the same side anymore. You're not aligned. Okay, next. So the core skills in motivational interviewing really lie with asking open-ended questions, the ability to recognize change talk, the ability to provide strength-based summaries of the answers to the open-ended questions that you have asked, and the ability to plan for action. Those are the core skills. Next. So open-ended questions, what are those? Yeah, they tend to start with W's and H's as opposed to C's and D's. If you start your sentence with a C, it's probably can or could you. If you start with a D, it's do you, right? That's going to lead to a yes or no answer. And an open-ended question is one that cannot be answered with a yes or a no alone. It elicits a story. The person has to tell you a longer piece of information than a simple affirmative or negative answer. Next. So we use these to elicit the client's story. And we're storytellers as Native people. That's how we transmit knowledge and wisdom down generations. We tell stories, we share our experiences, share our insights through stories. And we want to elicit the relative's story. We want them to share their path with us so that we can see where they are and how to best guide them along. When they tell you their story, that's going to evoke emotion about behavior change that will eventually serve as motivation, right? So you're gathering these emotional like sparks along the way. There'll be a spark in each bit of the story, right? And you're gathering those up. you'll eventually arrive at a pretty clear picture of how they feel about behavior change, as long as you keep asking your open-ended questions and stay on task. Next. So, open-ended questions should be evocative. Why would you want to make this change? What are the 3 best reasons to do it? What do you think you'll do? When you hear change talk in response to any of those evocative questions, you're going to follow up by asking for elaboration. You're going to ask for details. You want them to explain in what way? How do you see that happening? Next. Another way to do that is by asking for examples. This is another way of asking for elaboration. When was the last time something like this happened? You can also ask them questions about the future. If you go on without changing anything, exactly as things are now, what's likely to happen in 5 years? If you're 100% successful in changing the behavior that we're talking about, smoking, drinking, methamphetamines, opioids, whatever. If you're 100% successful in making that change now, how's 5 years from now going to look then? Right? Just asking them to project themselves into the future. Your role when you're doing motivational interviewing is to ask the person questions they have not asked themselves. And that's what all of the open-ended questions are for, is to help them to explore their experience. Okay, next. Ask people what their guiding values are. Simple. What values are the most important to you? How does this behavior fit into your value system? If you ask people what the 3 top things that they value in their world are, in Native communities, one of them is going to be family. So what is this behavior? How does it relate to your role in your family structure or the relationships that you value? How does it affect those? What does this behavior mean for who you are as an Indigenous person? And I think that a lot of us have a notion of our identity that is grounded in our heritage. And it means that there are certain obligations that we have to live up to, that we have to fulfill. You know, there are no gifts, there are only obligations, only duties. And to help a person compare their current pattern of behavior to that responsibility and that obligation can help to develop discrepancy. And that's what you're really getting at when you're doing MI, is developing just a discrepancy between how the person would like to view themselves and what their actual behavior at this point in time is a reflection of, right? So the actual versus the ideal. If you can highlight the discrepancy between those two, the person will become uncomfortable because we don't like there to be a difference between our actual and our ideal states. And so that will help them to be motivated to close that gap and to become more whole and integrated. Okay. I just did that. Okay. So an acronym that can help you recognize change talk is darn cat. Next. Not the Disney movie from the 1950s, but yeah, there we go. The D is for desire for change. The A refers to ability to change. R, reasons to change. And N is a need to change. So when people make statements that are any of these things, the darn part, we refer to that as preparation talk. This is the reason I have collaboration underlined here is because this is your role in the collaborative relationship with a relative across from you. Your role is to recognize when these things happen and get elaboration, get them to produce more change talk around the emergent theme. These we think of as commitment talk. So commitment to change, action toward change, and taking next steps. So preparation talk, and next slide, commitment talk. Next slide. So recognizing strengths. This is really, really, really important and isn't talked about nearly enough in most motivational interviewing training that I'm aware of. You've elicited the story of the relative across from you. You've learned as much about where they are on their path as you can. You should know some things about them by the telling of that story. You should know how brave they are. You should know how grateful they experience toward their world. You should have a sense of how intelligent they are, how creative, how funny, how curious. These are all strengths. Next slide. So somebody's told you a really tough story, right? They've been beaten up, they've been stabbed, they've really had a pretty violent life. Wow, making it through all those struggles tells me you're really tough. You can handle some discomfort, right? That's pointing out a strength. It's reflecting back to them that you see something in them that is a strength. Next slide. You're going to work that strength into your summaries. So you're in motivational interviewing, you ask a series of open-ended questions, right? And you get a picture of how they feel about the behavior change. And then you're going to provide a little mini summary. And that summary is going to ensure that you understood the story as they meant to tell it. It's going to help the client think about their experience and values and develop discrepancy between their actual behavior and how they would prefer to be. It's going to remind them of their reasons for change because you will have gathered up these pieces of change talk throughout the conversation and tucked them away, kind of like a little medicine bundle, along the way in the path in the forest, right? With these little pieces of medicine in it. And then you're going to give the relative or client a chance to fill in the important details and emphasize their capacity to change, their past successes, and so on, right? And you're going to present this back to them and say, here's the story that you just told me. You're going to systematically turn their ambivalence around and hopefully make it into a strength. Maybe it's a self-awareness that they have, that they know that they have doubts, right? But at any rate, this is the story that you hope that they will adopt about their position and their situation. It's going to be one that empowers them to be able to make the behavior changes that they're considering. Okay, next slide. So when you throw your strengths that you've observed into your summary, you build a sense of efficacy within the person. You're affecting that A and the darn, that sense of their ability to make changes, right? You're providing a positive light in which to consider the behavior change, and you're going to emphasize their positive qualities. These are going to help resolve discrepancy through their personal strengths, right? That's how you're going to frame it, is because they've got all these personal strengths that you were able to pick up through the telling of their story. They can do this. They have the ability. They're empowered to do this. So in the example, you've been looking at the ways you're drinking, for instance, might be interfering with your health, and you want to be there for your daughter. That tells me you're the kind of person who can really be honest with himself and values his family, right? So you're sort of propping them up for being able to be honest with themselves and valuing their family, and casting their drinking behavior in a light that is threatening that, right? And that's highlighting the discrepancy. Okay, next. So when the client or relative has been making a lot of commitment statements, backed up with preparation statements, given lots of change talk, you ask the magic question. So what do you think you want to do about it? Next slide. If they weren't ambivalent, they wouldn't be in your office, so you're probably not going to get there that easily. So this is where we talk about rolling with resistance. So the status quo behavior is going to want to keep itself in place. Some things that you can do when the resistance comes up is use the ruler question. So you can use it to measure confidence, importance, or resolve, or many other things for that matter. But the ruler question is simply on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is not at all confident that you can do this. You just know that you can't. And 10 is absolutely certain that you can. Where do you fall? And say they give you a 6. If you want to elicit more change talk and get them to talk about more reasons to change, you say, oh, okay, why a 6 and not a 5? Right? And then they'll tell you the reasons that they gave it the higher rating. If you need to elicit the source of their resistance and where their ambivalence is coming from so that you can address it, you say, oh, that's interesting. Why a 6 and not a 7? Right? And then that they will tell you then their doubts or the reasons that they aren't sure that they can do it. Right? So your follow-up question to the ruler question is really going to sort of guide where you're going in the conversation. And again, you can apply that to any of the certainty, importance, or confidence. Okay, next. So after the resistance or ambivalence has been resolved, and you probably will have to do the ruler question multiple times, and you'll probably need to explore their ambivalence on multiple fronts. They'll have several reasons for maintaining the status quo, and you'll have to work through every one of them and develop a discrepancy and get change talk to come out of all of them. It can be a pretty lengthy iterative process. But once you've worked through it, probably not in a single session, most likely over the course of several sessions, you're going to get to a place where you're going to want to make some goals. Now, I'll often, when I'm in practice, I'll want to do a goal that is time bound for the next time I'm going to see them, so that we can talk about what progress they made on it, whether they achieved it or not. You know, did they attempt? And if they attempted, how many times did they try to do it, and so on and so forth. So I like to make sure that the goals that we set together are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. So specific means that you know exactly what it is that you're talking about. The behavior is very well defined and described. Measurable means that you can count it. You can count the behavior. How many times did they try to change the behavior? When they failed, why did they fail? So on and so forth. Attainable. Is it a good idea? If a person is physiologically dependent on alcohol at this moment in time, cold turkey quitting is not a good idea. That is not an attainable goal. They can go into status epilepticus and die. You do not want that. So the goals that you set need to be attainable. Realistic. Could they do it? Is it actually within their span of ability? Maybe they need to take baby steps to build up some confidence first, right? And then time bound. It's got to have a deadline. By when will they have achieved this? Okay, next. So motivational interviewing is a way of being with clients. There are some useful tools, but the crux of the matter is the spirit with which you enter the encounter. People are the experts on their own experience. Motivational interviewing is just a way of helping them to think about their experience. The theory of change is that as people express more pro-change thinking, they're more likely to change. And we can help empower them to do so. We are guides, that is all. The territory is their own heart. Next. How did I do on time? Oh, wow. We've got 20 minutes for discussion. That went a lot faster than I thought it was going to. So what thoughts do y'all have? Did this seem correct? Seem like a good idea? Yeah. I've done both. No, just send me an email and we'll set up dates and place. It's on the next slide. Yeah, so it's the 2-day workshop that Abigail sort of voluntold me to develop. And like I said, these slides are the intro, and then we roll into a bunch of exercises. And the first exercise, actually, let's have you guys pair off and do the first exercise now, since we have so much time. So pick a partner. It's probably easiest if they're right next to you. And the exercise is simple. This works best if you use your own issue. And I hope I don't have to remind anybody in this room about confidentiality. If people are going to use their own stuff in here, please respect that. respect their privacy and don't share that outside of this exercise or outside of this room. So we're going to go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. If you're a 1, you're the client. If you're a 2, you're the counselor. As the counselor, your job is to ask nothing but open-ended questions for the next 5 minutes. And then you're going to switch roles, and the client is going to become the counselor and ask open-ended questions and nothing but open-ended questions for 5 minutes. When you are playing the role of the client, your job is to answer the open-ended questions, but also if your counselor asks you a closed-ended question, you're to bark at them, no! Because they asked you a question that could be answered with a yes or a no, so you're telling them, no, don't do that. Because their job is to ask only open-ended questions, so you're helping them. Okay, everybody understand the assignment? Well done, well done. Okay, go for it. No.
Not right now. It's 5 o'clock.
Switch roles.
my background is in college here.
Problems at home, I been enough. Tell me about any differences that having a community technology.
Oh, that's a good question. So. I strive for
I would say I'm very.
I heard that too, and I was like, is she gonna do it? Is she gonna do it?
I'm excited to have someone with you.
Cool, thanks. Okay. All right, so we come back to the group. I know. So how was it?
It was. I was trying to listen to them and then not come up with like flows and then so that was my challenge.
Mm.
I want to listen, but I also What do I have to ask next? Not gonna-
Yeah, and the thing is that you won't really know what to ask next until you've heard all of the answer. And that's one of the things that you got to get used to. When you're asking open-ended questions, the answers are long, right? They are meant to elicit a story, and they do. And so you have to hear the whole story before you know what the next question should be. So it forces you into a place of actually truly listening. You have to pay attention. Otherwise, you won't know what to ask next. Yeah.
And they know it.
Uh-huh.
They know if you're not paying attention.
Totally.
They're watching your every.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're sharing something. And that something is precious to them. And if you're not going to give it the respect it's due, they're not going to bother.
They're like, why do you?
Exactly. Yep. What other observations?
I think too, one of the things that the two of us learned, I hope, was that, you know, it's hard to talk to a complete stranger. And one of the things you said, you need to get to know the person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes that can be very hard. And I live in a community where drugs are very, very heavy and
Mhm.
a lot of young people. Some of them, you know, kids, but I didn't know them. I didn't know a lot of the situations. So
Uh-huh.
it's really hard to get to know somebody.
Yeah.
You know, in one 30-minute session.
Right. Yeah, and when I do teach the whole workshop, we work through a session from all the way from building rapport through action planning, right? And so like we run the whole thing. So this was the first exercise from that workshop. You have to repeat this part in every successive exercise. So you get basically 2 days worth of practice in asking open-ended questions and being punished for asking closed-ended questions. And it's probably the most useful thing that people get out of the workshop is that practice. That's the most common comment that I get from people is, I've been to a lot of motivational interviewing trainings, but I never got this much practice actually trying to do it in any of those with the immediate feedback. So the exercises get successively longer. You're given more to do. Like the next one, you have to write down 2 strengths after 5 minutes of asking the person open-ended questions. You know, you switch partners with every exercise and so on and so forth. And the way that, if you remember, I referred to the spiral learning model, right? How in Native cultures, we don't think of learning as a linear thing. We think of it, you know, you go over the same material over and over again, and you get a deeper understanding every time you do it. That's why we start you off with this exercise. And you have to do this exercise in addition to one more thing with each successive exercise. So the one after recognizing strengths is you have to, which one is that? Oh yeah, you have to provide different types of reflections. So there's clarifying, amplifying, minimizing, and deepening reflections. And so you have to employ at least 3 reflections during the course of your 7-minute, by that point, open-ended question section, right? So you're only allowed to then ask open-ended questions and provide reflections. And then, yeah.
Feedback for more specifically those that are like,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they answer open-ended questions just as well as anybody else. You can totally use this with children. You know, just keep your language simple and keep your, depending on their age, right? With younger kids, you need to be more concrete, whereas you can get a little bit more abstract with older kids and emerging adults. But yeah, motivational interviewing works just fine with children. Yeah. Mhm. I have given it over Zoom, and what we do is we assign people to breakout rooms in pairs to do the exercises, and then I stalker between the groups. I would specifically request that the classroom not be set up like this if I'm doing it in person, because I need to be able to walk through the entire crowd. Like I couldn't get to those folks back over there, so I wasn't able to give them any feedback. But yeah, over Zoom, you just assign people to breakout rooms at random. Yeah. I've done the Zoom version twice a year through the pandemic. I just gave the second one last week for the Urban Indian Health Institute. Yeah, if you go to the Urban Indian Health Institute website, you can sign up for their newsletter, and they tend to announce it through their biweekly newsletter. Yeah. Yeah, or we can have the folks that you said send them out. We have evaluations too, so if you want to take one and pass them. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I like it. It's fun, and it does in fact help your partner, you know, to recognize when they've asked a closed-ended question. The problem with closed-ended questions is that you don't get the person's story, for one, with yes and no answers. It takes a very long time to construct the kind of richness that you get in their answers to the open-ended questions. Like if you think about the first answer that you got to the first open-ended question that you asked today in this exercise, how many yes or no questions would you have had to ask in order to get that much information? A lot, right? It's time prohibitive. It's much more efficient to ask open-ended questions so you get the whole story with the context all at once. The other problem with closed-ended questions, they can't guide the conversation if they're just giving yes or no answers. And you want them in the driver's seat. You want to be in the passenger seat, right? You want to just be, you know, pointing out interesting roadside attractions. You don't want to be driving the car. And if you're asking closed-ended questions, you're the one driving the car. Because you're guiding exactly where everything is going to go, because you're the one asking the yes or no questions, and all they can tell you is yes or no. So yeah, there are a lot of pluses to using open-ended questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson, for that presentation.
Attends.
you.